Welcome to the last panel. And here we're going to deal with the issue that we haven't been dealing with that much, that is the integration of Ukraine, which is of course part of the end of the war, but also part of the war, that is the integration in the European and Euro-Atlantic economic, political and security structures. And that is a question of EU and it's a question of NATO primarily. And we have an eminent panel to discuss these issues. And my suggestion is that we start with you, Olha Stefanishyna, who is the Deputy Prime Minister and responsible for EU integration, and hear your views on your preparations, where you see the EU process going, and what we will see happening during this year and the years to come.
Thank you, Carl. Good to see you again and all of you, and thank you for a great job we've been doing all together a Munich Security Conference when we really made it happen that Ukraine has been brought back on the top of the agenda, and I think it's very important. Good that you made a decision to combine two panels, so together with Boris Rush we would have less time, to speak about many things on NATO and focus on the most important. Probably two major things on our side, from Ukrainian perspective. I think that we are very well on track, both when it comes to EU and NATO. I think that Ukraine has really accepted the role of this front runner. We were the front runner of the enlargement policy. We revived it in the European Union, but also we are now front runner when it comes to accession to European Union, because first and foremost, because of Ukraine's capacity, because of Ukrainian parliament, who's capable of making the decision fast and basically does not remember how to function without EU agenda, that we have a fully mobilized civil society, prepared public administration, so we drive the process and we do not really accept any delays in that, and we do not give any precondition for political disbalances or failure in this process. Although it's hard, we are also at the same time doing our job, but at the same time we are learning of living in a broader society of environment of the European families, European nations. It requires us reinventing many things on the way, reinventing our relations with the neighboring countries, with Poland, with Hungary, with Slovakia, with Czechia, with everybody apart those who are not members of the European Union, right? It goes now much deeper than just the partnership and the friendship, so it requires us adjusting throughout the way. It requires us to build compromises and consensuses over complicated decisions, and hear some kind of tough arguments against Ukraine, but not to get upset throughout the way. So this is part of the reality we're adjusting, but we are learning throughout the way. We're moving forward, and just today we had a great experience of meeting between President von der Leyen and President Zelensky. This is a very mature dialogue, very realistic dialogue, and many things have been brought back on track in terms of Ukraine accession, and I think that already March will become a good month for a good news in that regard. So, but on the EU track, it's rather clear. In terms of bilateral relations between Ukraine and EU. But what is more important for us as a country at war and a country which is striving for its survival and a victory, what comes after the war is over. And we see that EU has become a capable structure to address the challenges and to form the backup strategies in case of different crises. For example, now when we have a long-term disagreement on the financial package for Ukraine in the US Congress, what has been done by European Union, by the leaders? They are mobilized, they are united, there are meetings, on Monday in Paris to discuss what will be done. So they are not saying that it will be hard, it will be complicated. They are mobilizing to take an action, and this is the Europe we believe in. And this is rather clear, and we are really happy with that. On NATO, it's really hard to communicate things on NATO in Ukrainian audience because for decades we have been in a situation of ambiguity where we had promises not backed up by actions. But probably at this point of time I can only confirm as the Deputy Prime Minister in charge that the wording that Ukraine is to become a member of NATO is now for real. It's interpreted in every day of our engagement. Ukraine is part of basically all NATO structures. We're working on interoperability. We have the priority reform plans. We have the consensus that Ukraine will be invited to NATO, not only seen there. So there are some steps we're waiting for Washington, but at the same time, the pressure on my side personally is not such as it was for Vilnius, because now I have the feeling that things are for real. So I'll stop here probably.
Thanks very much. Before we applause is called for. Before we move over to the NATO question, one question from me on the EU side. You said there were good meetings with von der Leyen today. That's excellent. There was some uncertainty on the timing of the discussion about the negotiating framework in the media. But you said that you think there would be good signals coming already in March on that particular issue.
Yes, so I will leave it in a way that there are zero uncertainties at the moment. And Ukraine is happy with the outcome of the discussion.
Well, I should not correct the Deputy Prime Minister, but I would say the phrase zero uncertainty doesn't exist when it comes to the politics of Europe. But say that is 99%, that's fine.
Yes, as I said, we're just learning how to speak the same English, you know?
Yeah. That's it. That's the way it should be. Over to NATO. We have the Assistant Secretary General for Political and Security Policy from NATO headquarters, Boris Ruge, here. And in his mandate is the question of new members. So, Boris, where are we?
So there's one... Is this working? Yes. There's one new member soon that will be Sweden, and we look forward to that happening. But let me say first that this is an emotional day to be in Kyiv, and I think all of us who are visiting come away impressed by the determination of Ukrainians, and also with an even greater sense of urgency. And a sense of urgency is what is badly needed given the realities of Russia's aggression against Ukraine. The future of Ukraine is in NATO. That's a quote from most recently from the statement that we put out as the NATO-Ukraine Council today, together. So the future of Ukraine is in NATO. And my boss put out a statement on top of that saying it is not a question of if, but of when. So it is serious. And we are working with our Ukrainian partners, also looking forward to the Washington summit, which is less than 5 months away, to lend credibility to this statement. And we are in constant contact with our Ukrainian partners, also through the NATO-Ukraine Council, which we established in Vilnius. And I believe that when we come to Washington, we will have an agreement among 32 allies and an agreement with Ukraine on how we can take this forward and underpin this objective with real steps that will show, including to people in this country, that we are serious and that NATO and Ukraine are moving closer together.
Excellent. We heard from the Deputy Prime Minister on the government, but we also have the presidential administration here. So, Ihor Shovka, could you confirm that Ukraine is ready for all of this?
Ukraine is more than ready, and you know we're confirming it during these 730 days of open aggression, because let me remind everyone and the people in Ukraine do remember this fifth day of war and bid for membership coming from the leadership of the country, from president, from prime minister, from speaker of the parliament. Fifth day of war, then, you know, most of the so-called experts predicted us complete defeat. Okay, if not the fifth day, then maybe in a week, and not in a week, and 10 days, 1 month, or whatever. Now we're having today this sad anniversary, if it's not anniversary, sad mark of 2 years of war. But these 2 years of war, we showed that we cannot only withstand and we cannot only, survive, but we know how to win. And this is also comes to the processes of European and Euro-Atlantic integration. I mean, you're asking Karl about uncertainty. Let me tell you very openly, it's very difficult to be uncertain with this president, and I'm not talking only about Ukrainians. There should not be not a single moment of uncertainty vis-à-vis Ukraine. And if sometimes this uncertainty appears, this is our task to make this uncertainty certainty. And this will be all the time before we become members to both of these institutions. We have kind of bad, with President. After the victory, what process will end quicker? Membership to EU or membership to NATO? I will not tell you bets, you will see. But we cannot afford to those heroes sitting here today, to our people, to have a single moment, a day, a minute, or second of procrastination, not from us, not from you, sorry. I will tell you this story. I'm telling you, maybe someone heard it already. 1st of March, after this bid for membership for the EU, you remember there was a session of European Parliament. And before that, I remember there was a session of European Parliament on the 16th of February, and we were trying to make this resolution to have the words candidacy status in vain. In vain, we worked with all the factions, including EPP, all our friends, nothing. On the 1st of March, there was great words of support of Ukraine, candidate status, European choice, European values, etc. Wonderful resolution. And then in the evening, I've got a call from one of my friends who was serving in the armed forces long before the open aggression, and he was on the battlefield. And he was calling me asking, so where in the EU? I said, how come? Maybe I missed something. But look, I watched the news today, I read the channels. So yesterday the president made an application. Today the European Parliament, this is like, endorsed this. So we're in NATO, we're in the EU. I said, wait, a little bit too early, but we are moving in the right direction. You are thinking the right way. This is a morale. So the title of the conference of the panel is whether it's political. It's political. It's instrumental, certainly, because every step is, we haven't missed any step towards the EU. We were told, be obedient students. Don't miss any single stage of the process of EU integration. EU process should be credible. We have not missed any single stage. But we will not let anyone to procrastinate or to make any bureaucratic impediments for Ukraine. So you know about this merit-based approach. So if we've done the bid was endorsed, we've made the questionnaire, we received the candidate status. We had the 7 steps, we fulfilled them, we have the next steps. So now we have to have a next steps. That was discussed today with Ursula, which Olga mentioned. Framework, International Governmental Conference, and we opened the negotiations. Once again, we will not let anyone to procrastinate. And first of all, we'll not let ourselves, because we are doing, like we are told, 150%, 200% of our internal things, internal reforms, internal home tasks, and we'll be following that way.
That sounds absolutely excellent. Going over to the celebrated European Parliament, Mikhail, on the EU side, the accession process is a complicated thing which lost some time. Detailed negotiations is done by the governments, formally speaking, in the form of an intergovernmental conference, Commission being driving it, or doing it on behalf of the government, to be precise, but Parliament, of course, being a key partner and key driver. How do you see the stages ahead in light of what you've heard?
Well, first of all, when NATO and EU is on the same podium, that reminds me always, and Ukraine needs, of course, both. It reminds me, to put it in a nutshell, of the founding father of Lithuania, Vytautas Landsbergis, who used to say, well, NATO is for life and EU is for better life. So, so that is the short version. And as I said, Ukraine, of course, needs both. Now, for the EU part, we have especially in the Parliament as an institution, we have been the driving force in this regard, and also Andrius is one of those who has been one of those from the major motors in this regard, but many others. And we have always had, when it comes about Ukraine, both on membership perspective and candidate status and all that, and now with the dreadful war, we have always had in the Parliament more than 90% support of Ukraine. So that is the first thing. The next thing is, of course, contrary to NATO membership, where if political will is there is not that much criteria to be fulfilled when you look at some smaller countries who were suddenly in, to be honest. Yeah, so there was the decision, okay, to have the Adriatic coast complete, we take one country in, so without asking perhaps too much. But for the EU, it's more comprehensive and difficult. And of course, we want a Ukraine that resembles to the other countries after this dreadful war, of course, and on the way. And it is fulfilling this acquis, the requirements for membership, and at the end, it is a normally functioning, sometimes I say boring democracy. That is the kind of Ukraine we want to see in. And on the way there, they have passed a good track. They are on the right track. But there are, of course, as in all countries and in all cases, and now, of course, aggravated by this dreadful war situation, there are issues that need to be addressed on the way. But we are confident, and politically we want it for Ukraine to succeed. And when the negotiation framework is now ready in March, I'm fine. We are happy for that. I said at an earlier part of the conference, next week we will finally rubber stamp the result of the trilogue on the Ukraine facility, and the Commission got the easiest procedure to implement it. And so in the first week of March, that is at least what they promised us, the first tranche of the 50 billion will be paid. And that is necessary because we lost 2 months because of Viktor Orban in December. So we are right on track now, and Ukraine also, but it will remain cumbersome in details, and the Commission is used to these procedures, and we will also not let you get off the hook when there are issues. And of course, after the war, we'll be more strict than during the war. That is also clear. But I'm confident that there are enough people in the Parliament, in the government, in the Bankova, and in the civil society for whom we have provided also a role in the implementation of that, of this facility, where all forces hopefully then work together in the same direction to avoid from the EU side that there is no grey zone anymore after this war. That is the other part for the NATO side. There must not be a grey zone. Ukraine must not end up in a grey zone. And I've carefully, and you are an excellent diplomat, Boris, I know you long enough, I know what you have not said. You have not said, and that is the discussion that we must conduct, that there will in Washington be an invitation to join NATO. Not NATO membership, but invitation, so that it is clear after this war, this country is not on the NATO side in a grey zone.
Could I just add on the EU enlargement side, for the sake of sort of completion, that it's also part of a process where we have, in this part of the world, Moldova, more or less in parallel, remains to be seen. And there are also the question of the Western Balkans, where some member states will say, well, okay, with Ukraine, which is most important, but then we must move in parallel with the Western Balkans. Whether that will happen or not remains to be seen, because it's dependent upon the performance of, say, the Bosnians and others. But that's going to be part of the debate inside the European Union as well. No question that Ukraine is the strategic objective, but there are some other pieces to that particular puzzle as well. By that, we have 3 persons more to commend. Primarily, none of them are members of the EU, so I would suspect it will be somewhat biased towards the NATO side. Canada has never applied for membership of the EU. If they did, we would be forced to say that it wouldn't work, because they're in the wrong part of the world from that point of view. Otherwise, you're in a good part of the world. But Ali Ehsassi is chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the House of Parliament of Canada, and most welcome here. We see that you have your Prime Minister in town as well.
Yes, we actually have our Prime Minister, our Deputy Prime Minister, and the Minister of Defense in Kyiv today.
Yeah, what's happening in Canada? That's deserted.
We're all good. No, I think what is important to point out is that for the past several months, what we have seen is unfortunately one party in particular is no longer as unwavering in its support of Ukraine. And at times like this, it's been known to happen in other countries, but we think that when these sorts of things do happen, that those in public service have to step forward and they have to lead the way and demonstrate how incredibly important it is that we all step up and continue to help Ukraine. And the good news is, given that the government really has stepped up after there were some divisions within our House of Commons, the polls are suggesting that Canadians understand full well how important it is that we be there for Ukraine. Everyone can only marvel at the incredible work Ukrainians have been doing. And so we intend to be unwavering in our support and to continue on as best we can.
Sounds great. Tobias Ellwood from the House of Commons in the UK. How does it look from your perspective?
Which bit? Firstly, thank you. It's a real pleasure to participate in this important panel. And I think it's wise that this comes at the end of our important discussions today, because absolutely right, we focused on what Ukraine needs to put this fire out, to push Russia back. What is the equipment? What is the kit? What is the munitions and so forth? And I'm really proud of what Britain's done from the very, very start, from NLAWs to Storm Shadows to Brimstones, training on Salisbury Plain, tanks and so forth. We need to do more, clearly. The wider question that we started to touch on is the fact that even if you defeat Russia, push those troops out of Ukraine's territory, it won't stop Russia's wider intentions. And that's where NATO then comes in. Because the bigger picture that we're experiencing here, which I don't think is the penny has really dropped yet, and that was perhaps the heart of the intervention I made earlier, is that we are still distracted by domestic issues in the UK, as indeed America is, when they tie $60 billion worth of funding to issues on the New Mexico border. The penny hasn't dropped yet that we have moved into a new era of insecurity, where there's a new Axis alliance that's developed, a geopolitical alliance that is challenging our rules-based order. And the question is, what are we going to do about it? So the immediate objective is absolutely to help Ukraine. The wider challenge is then what happens next. And that's perhaps the pertinence of why we need to help Ukraine, because it won't stop there. Now, you touched on the Balkans. I actually served under General Wesley Clark when I was in uniform in Bosnia. They're not a member of the Balkans. Much of the Balkans are not members of NATO. I served or had connections with and did business with Iraq and in Afghanistan. They weren't members of NATO either. But now we chose, prior to this invasion, to say, absolutely, we will not support Ukraine because they're not a member of NATO. We blinked at that moment. And you might recall, Boris, I think, Carl, I don't know if you were there, but there was a small Munich Security Conference meeting in Almau in December before the invasion. And I went up to a senior 4-star US general, I shan't say who it was, and I said to him, if you were asked, if the politicos asked you to send in a couple of divisions from across Europe, who are members of NATO, into Ukraine before Russia had moved its tanks in, would we be able to do it? And he'd already done their homework. 16th Air Assault Brigade, 82nd Airborne, 101st. He'd already done the homework. He was waiting for the green light for the top politicians in Europe to say, we're going to support Ukraine now, and we're going to look Putin in the eye, and we're not going to blink. But we did blink. And you remember those conversations about defensive weapons and then offensive? Well, we need to rekindle that Cold War sense of statecraft. And we need to do that now because Russia won't stop here. And that is the big question for NATO. as we dibble and dabble about whether Ukraine should be a member or not. And this talk of, let's say, we'll wait for the war is over, it's too late then. I would say as a stepping stone, there's something called the Joint Expeditionary Force. And those of you who aren't familiar with that, I'm sure everybody in this room is. It's NATO light. Join it tomorrow. Really, that will be the stepping stone there. And then make Washington really that important summit that says the invitation is on the table, let's work around it. But let's not kid ourselves, there's going to be a couple of nations that might, as we saw with Sweden and Finland, present problems. But ultimately, it needs to be the coalition of the willing. Otherwise, Putin will continue what he's doing, not just in Ukraine, but further afield. That's the bigger picture that we need to wake up to. Thank you.
Thank you. And then back across the Atlantic again, Jon Herbst. There is the impression, anyhow, that there's been some uncertainty on what the US administration heading into its complicated election, what they are ready to do at the NATO summit in the summer.
Thank you. That was a wonderful intervention, and it's hard to follow it. I've been coming to events on Moscow's war in Ukraine, which is not, as we all know, 2 years old, but 10 years old, for 7 or 8 years, actually 6 or 7 years. And virtually all of them, but especially since the large invasion, have involved a great deal of advocacy for strong policies in the West, which have rarely been achieved. And I think we're at another such moment. We know what the problem is here in this room. The problem is a revisionist Russia that's willing to commit aggression to achieve its aims. And while the aggression is focused on Ukraine, the aims go beyond Ukraine. And the aims include the certainly undermining, if not the destruction, of NATO. And the timidity which has characterized the conversation about Ukraine and NATO, a timidity felt especially in Washington and Berlin, is actually a timidity that goes beyond that simple question. We could talk about the unwillingness to step up on the Ukraine-NATO relationship, and we'd be right. But I remember in the late in November and December of 2015, when Russian warplanes strayed into Turkish territory for the 4th time, the Turks shot it down, and NATO members were cowering what they should do. Now, I'm not a fan of Erdogan, but NATO as an alliance did not show the fortitude it needed to send a message to Putin, don't mess with NATO, and to buck up its members facing the dangers of Putin's possible or actual aggression. And if you pay attention to the conversation in Moscow, and for that matter, in certain ostrich-like Western circles, about, well, what would NATO do if suddenly 5,000 Russian special forces wound up in Estonia? The conversation is not a pretty one. So we need to embrace Ukraine, because you'll have no stability in Europe without Ukraine joining NATO, and because we want to make sure that NATO is as sound an alliance in 10 years as it's been for the last 75. Those are the stakes, and they are very, very high. And I would love to see Mr. Ellwood's comments prove a prophecy for the Washington summit. But it ain't going to happen. Or rather, the chances of it happening are next to zero unless the same nations that tried to stand up, and did stand up for a time, prior to the Vilnius summit, stand up again. Because if they don't, you will see a very thin gruel served at the Washington NATO summit. At the Atlantic Council, we put together a memo to the President in October, recognizing the many problems which I've alluded to here. And we suggested not even something as bold as an invitation to join NATO at the Washington summit. Of course, we don't see any way in the world that the administration would do that. So we proposed something which we think is a decent step in that direction, which is to invite Ukraine to membership accession talks, something a step shy of actual invitation. The administration was not enthusiastic about that idea. We then consulted here in other East European capitals and Western European capitals. We got a fair amount of enthusiasm for the proposal, but no one willing to stand up because they didn't want to have a fight with Washington. The only way you'll get progress in Washington at the NATO summit, I repeat, is if a dozen or so nations, and I can name them, and I think everyone in the room, or most everyone in the room can name them, stand up and say, we represent a substantial part of NATO. NATO unity is important, but it's not NATO unity defined by the weakest chain in the NATO alliance, because that's what we heard in the Vilnius summit. And I think I've caused enough mischief today. Thank you.
Thank you. Time is running. We might have time for one or two questions. Yes, reliable.
Hello to everyone. I have a very short question. When I visited with colleagues Munich Security Conference, there were a lot of discussions. Is it already European war or still Ukrainian? But very important message from NATO headquarters, high-level politician, was that NATO has to prevent war against NATO member countries. If Russia will invade one of the NATO countries, that means that NATO already lose. So how do you see the prevention of this type of aggression where Ukrainians support?
Before Boris answers that, Mr. Singer is as well.
Thank you, colleagues and friends, and thank you, Victor, for collecting all of us here, more or less the same brave team who are supporting European integral soil here in Ukraine. I would like first to say, Carl, that I remember your function before you even became a prime minister, being simple the head of moderator party in opposition, telling to everyone, Sweden should be in NATO. Sweden should be in NATO. For countless years, from the 89, 90, 91, 92, 93, 94. And for that, I would like to say that you were on the other side of Baltics, from the Lithuanian perspective. You were our John McCain. Thank you for that during last years. That's coming back to the memory about the essence of today's meeting, and especially to the evening meeting. It's related to the Ukrainian membership in Union that was incredibly brave done. Probably that's not Ukrainian view, but our view, it was done cleverly, the candidate membership. And all countries who finally made decision, including Germany. I was in Bundestag 1 month before. It was unclear in the fog, and after that was crystal clear. That was great step forward, the membership in Union candidate status. Russia fighting European Union political territory now. Forget all those their expressions from 90s terrible time. Neighborhood. You remember this zoo expressions, Russian near neighborhood. Близкое зарубежье. Finita with that. Third news is about how Mr. Putin looks. What is his view about that? That is extremely interesting to say that we Lithuanians, during our chairmanship, and Mr. Gahler probably can remember that 2013, 28th of November, invited Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia to become association member. I was in the chamber when Yanukovych making calls to Moscow in front of Merkel and everyone, telling, he is not allowing me to sign the association agreement. He is telling we cannot go to the West, he told. That means it's not about NATO. In general, it's about liberation of Ukraine, of Moscow dictatorship. It's about the West, about Ukrainian being firm member from our democratic society. And my question is about how we will cement the democratic world with all those issues related to freedom and democracy, and how this quality of cement, when the democratic world now is shrinking, will be worked out in our parliamentary manufactures, in our executive manufactures. How quick we will go over this terrible politicizing issues of Mexican border, Capitol Hill. We should solve that immediately. Well, that's harm our political solidarity. Democracy first. Thank you.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Time is running. We don't have time for more. I let our voice from Canada and I let our voice from NATO headquarters answer these two questions.
Thank you. I think that's a great question. As we're noting, there are some countries that are slowing down the process. And I think we all have to recognize that we have to step up, but also that a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. So in circumstances where there's a lot of politicization in various countries and they're holding up what they need to do to support Ukraine, I think we all have to pull together. And an example of that was several weeks ago. Several of us from myself from Canada, but other parliamentarians from the UK, from Spain, from Lithuania, from Poland, several of them are actually here today. We decided we were going to descend upon Washington and say, this is really unacceptable. This has been going on for way too long, and we really want to see you focused on this issue. I think at times like this, when we're in Ukraine and we see the unspeakable crimes that Putin has committed here, we have to rise above politics. It's not acceptable to say, we're just going through our procedures. We should all band together and make sure that everyone is stepping up and is there for Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you. Boris?
I'll be very brief because I think our Ukrainian colleagues should have the last word. So the answer to your question, ma'am, I think is NATO is turning 75 this year, and in its 75-year history, it has never been attacked by another state. It was attacked on 9/11 by Al-Qaeda, and Article 5 was invoked in order to support the United States. So if NATO were attacked, NATO would be able to respond, and there's not a shadow of a doubt about that, right? That's my answer to your question. As for Washington, I would say, I can imagine a lot of things for Ukraine in Washington, but the reality of this alliance is it operates on the basis of consensus, and soon it will have 32 members. So the Secretary General will work very, very hard to serve up not a thin gruel, but a sturdy meal that will do something for Ukraine in the real world, and we will see what that is. But we're working on that, and it is not a kind of effort to dress up something. It is a very serious effort to support Ukraine in its fight against Russia.
Thank you, and the final word to the Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you, Carl. We're looking at this picture and trying to recollect everything we've managed to face through this 24-year and 2 years of being in a war, and probably like just 2 points on my side. First, none of you heard anything new over the panel today. Absolutely. And I think everybody who's been advocating and working and helping us in the countless meeting, discussions, negotiations, many things has been said, many things has been done. Have we been disappointed throughout the way at some points? Yes, we did. A lot of times. I was disappointed to have meetings in Berlin just months ago saying that never this decision will be taken. This is no way to go. Ukraine is not the time, right? this is speaking about the consensus. Was I disappointed to hear that basically we're not able to mobilize another tranche of military support because we do not know if you will survive? Okay, let's see if you're alive next time you're coming, so we will think about that. Igor and everybody in our team, including the president of Ukraine, none of you here around present have heard so many bad things over these 2 years. But we are moving forward, and maybe just one very important thing about me, about Ukraine. You know a lot about our bravery, about our resilience, about our commitment, but there's another things you always have to know. Whenever you hesitate on taking sort of decisions, whenever you compare Ukraine to somebody or trying to put any balances between historical periods of this and that time, you always have to know that Ukraine at all times has been a reliable partner. Ukraine has at all times has been delivering on its commitment. Ukraine has at all times been sticking to the values and the rules all the time. And if you will recollect why Yanukovych has become a president back in 2010, he had a European program. He promised that he will sign the association agreement and Ukraine will become a Europe. So Ukraine will move forward. Ukraine will get what we want. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when, and Ukraine made it happen. Ukraine will make it happen to you. So do not hesitate, be confident about Ukraine. And if it's not a question of if the wars will be over and if there will be a Ukrainian victory, it will be there. There are so many uncertainties on our side throughout this way, but it will be there because it is us, it's our country, and we will make it happen. So winner takes it all, we will take it all, we will hold Russia accountable, we will win the war, no matter by those who will stand with us or who will not be standing with us. So stand with us, it's better to be on the light side. Thank you.
Thank you. Igor from the presidential administration, anything to add?
Probably, I will say NATO and the EU were very bad before current period as we speak, in deterring Russia and preventing Russian aggression. I will not go deep into history, but look, 2008, you missed the opportunity with membership action plan for Ukraine. You received the Russian aggression in Georgia. In 2014, when Russia started illegal annexation of the Crimea, we were hearing, don't provoke, don't escalate, let's tame the beast, and we received what we received. Only on the 17th of July, Europe started to awaken after this tragedy with the MH17. In 2021, when my president was asking for preemptive sanctions for a lethal weapon, we were hearing, no time, don't escalate, don't provoke Russia. We received an open Russian aggression in 2022. But in 2022, the reaction was tremendous, and probably this was one of Putin's miscalculation. He underestimated the level of unity around Ukraine in 2022. So where do we are now if we're speaking about deterrence and prevention? Not only Ukraine now prevented spreading of Russian aggression across the EU and NATO members, and this is a fact, and this is true. But if we follow logically this way, only Ukraine can help you to deter Russia, being a full-fledged member to European or Euro-Atlantic security. We are doing now these concrete steps. When we're now concluding the bilateral security agreements between Ukraine and EU and NATO countries, this is also about deterrence. When Russia sees that the biggest countries such as UK, Italy, Germany, France are together with Ukraine, they give concrete weapons, they provide concrete amount of money which is fixed on the paper for 10 years more before Ukraine enters NATO. This is deterrence. When Ukraine will enter NATO and the EU, it will continue its responsibility for this part of the world. Now fighting against Russia, we are already facing the responsibility for Eastern European part of the continent because we are waging a real-time warfare against not the second strongest army in the world like they claimed, but not against the weakest army in the world. With your brand of the art weapon, with our people experience, who can share this experience with you and share your experience during the trainings. So it's mutually beneficial, actually. If I were, you know, a rational member of EU and NATO, I would say, I mean, it's beneficial for me to take Ukraine in NATO, because it's much more better for me than the Ukrainian brigades will stay on the eastern flank of NATO, because they are experienced, they are knowledgeable, and they are brave, and they know how to win Russia. Thank you.
Thank you.